Let's talk a little bit about the travel. You've told us, you gave us sort of the Cliff Notes version, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in more detail another time. That ultimately the reason you make the decision to leave the WWF and go back is because you had young kids and you were on the road all the time and you just felt like you were missing too many of those moments, basically because of the increased schedule compared to what you enjoyed for Jim Crockett. 2 months in, are you already getting the feeling that, hey, I'm going to be working a lot more? Or is it still so new and fresh and fun that negativity maybe hadn't set in yet?
Well, I knew immediately it was going to be a lot tougher, but the bigger picture is we had a handshake deal and a verbal promise of making more money and it being just nothing but uphill from day one with that company. So we were still on that high. And up to that point, he was a man of his word. We were being treated real well. The fact that was, though, every single morning, 6 a.m. flight. And if you missed that flight for any reason, that piece of paper, and back then there were paper tickets, was totally worthless. You had to purchase a whole nother ticket. There wasn't like paying a fee or anything. Those tickets were so cheap, and it was group tickets. They were next to worthless.
Right.
So that's a lot of pressure. Everybody's going to sleep in at some point, especially if you're on last. If you've got a bit of a drive to the next town where there's an airport, you end up getting 2 hours sleep. It's pretty easy to miss that 4:30 wake up call or 4 o'clock or whatever it was to make a 6 o'clock flight. So it was very demanding.
Yeah, I can imagine that, that takes some adjusting. I guess we should tell everybody, what your travel schedule was like with Jim Crockett. You're talking about 6 a.m. commercial flights here, but with Jim Crockett, sometimes the territories were short enough you could make a drive. Other times you're on Crockett's jet. It's not apples to apples. Fair to say?
Oh no, my God, it was anything but. When I first got to Jim Crockett, everything was drives, and there were some issues with their scheduling. There were some very, very, very long rides and some that just didn't make any sense, but they were all drives at that point. Then when business caught on fire, they bought the first plane. Anything that was like 350 miles and above, we would get on the plane. And that's the difference in, going through some of these back roads in North Carolina and South Carolina and Virginia and mountain roads. It took to drive that trip. That's, 5-6 hour trip each way. Nothing to sneeze at. But it was just, the hotter the company got and the planes and all the structuring and all that, it really, what a blessing, especially when they added the second plane, which financially was probably very stupid, but that's a 10-seat Falcon jet up and down, buddy. You're talking, that was a piece of machinery. And that was, I remember one night we got in St. Louis and we had like 100-mile-an-hour tailwind and we're flying to Atlanta for TV the next day. And I want to say, we flew from St. Louis to Atlanta in about an hour and 15 minutes, which is hauling ass pretty good. And that was one of the benefits that Crockett had over WWF. And buddy, it was nothing. And I'm not kidding. For us to have, we would get our stack of tickets, and I'll never forget this routing. This was one loop, like a 5-day loop. It was Boston out to LA, LA back to Miami, Miami to Kansas City, Kansas City back to Uniondale. Now, what sense that made, God only knows. But you're talking about long flights, connections, issues, incredible. And they would hand you that with no remorse and say, here you go.
It's a lot different. And we should mention, it's not just, flying with Crockett versus flying with Vince. One's private, one's commercial. A lot of our listeners, myself included, have never flown private, but I imagine that's a little different than going through the traditional airport rigmarole.
You bet it is. You don't have any of the issues of airlines being overbooked, being stuck in a little bitty seat. You're talking about guys that are 200 to 300 pounds. And if you've ever looked at a coach seat, it's about 12, 15 inches across. Just look at this next time you fly on a commercial flight, look at the seat in front of you and measure the width. They don't care. They're getting richer, that being the airlines. And every seat on both the planes were oversized seats, comfortable as it could possibly be, all kind of adult beverages for after the show, all kind of soft drinks and everything. Bathroom, you could get up anytime you wanted. You had a big, nice bathroom on both planes. Food, everything. It's a whole different experience flying private.
Should mention just 1 year prior to this, you're in Chicago wrestling the Road Warriors, just like you talked about, Starrcade 87. And now a year later, you're here at Survivor Series. If you would have told Arn Anderson, Starrcade 87, hey, a year from now, you'll be on the WWF Survivor Series pay-per-view, you think he would have believed it?
Nope. If you would have told me that they would have let me go, or thought that it was the right thing to let me go, or after that match with the Road Warriors, if for any reason we would have been in any kind of turmoil and or jeopardy or even an argument about positioning, you could probably count on one hand the guys on earth that could have pulled off the match, making the Road Warriors in Chicago, in their hometown, look like they looked. Probably count them on one hand. And those guys drew money. So when you enhance part of the product that's already drawing money and you make them look as good as they can possibly look, you accomplish something. So no, I wouldn't have skipped ahead for a year and saw that I was standing on the apron with 15 other guys.
The Bolsheviks and the Conquistadors. Let's talk about the real human aspect of this date. I think it gets lost on a lot of our listeners that November 24th, 1988, the day of the show, is Thanksgiving here in America. What was the Thanksgiving spread like? Did Vince cater Thanksgiving when you get to go home? Do you do a late Thanksgiving with the family, or is that not even a holiday that wrestlers got to experience?
Oh, it's probably right in the middle of a loop, probably in the middle of a 10-dayer. Yeah, okay, they probably had turkey for catering and all that stuff, but you can't go load up.
Sure.
You got to go get after it.
Right.
That big deal. So, you didn't think about holidays, and I was already conditioned from Jim Crockett. We would work twice on Christmas Day for Jim Crockett. The difference was we would go down to Greenville, which was a 2-hour drive, do a 1:00 show, throw on a pair of sweats, come back to Charlotte. Charlotte Coliseum would be sold out that night, Christmas night. So you missed pretty much, if you had little kids, you missed most of the day. You could get up with them first thing in the morning and open presents and all that, but you had to head out, about, probably about 10 o'clock in the morning to go down to Greenville and back. But you made a nice payday. It was beneficial because that nice Christmas that your kids just had, you paid for it that day by working that double shot. And we were used to working on holidays. There was no such thing as a day off. It did not exist. 85, once I arrived there until we left, 88, there was no such thing as a day off. If you got hurt, you went to work. If you wanted to get off to get married or something, you might get 1 or 2 days off, but it's very, very rare. And so we were accustomed to working on Thanksgiving Day.